The Panasonic GH4 was released back in 2014. Now, at the time, this cost around $1,700. Nowadays, you can find it used for about $450, and you can actually find it cheaper than that if you shop around. So just what do you get with this 8-year-old camera? Well, there's a 16 megapixel micro four thirds sensor, 4K video at 24 and 30 frames per second, and a 3-inch 1.3 million dot fully articulating LCD screen. Build quality of the GH4 is magnesium alloy, and it is really good. You know, with the GH1 and the GH2, both of those were kind of plasticky, but by the time we got to the GH3, Panasonic started taking this lineup a bit more seriously, and it shows. The GH4 is no different. You know, you've got this magnesium alloy build quality, and it is super sturdy. Even though this is a small camera, it's actually got some weight to it. And a fun piece of trivia, the GH4 was the world's first mirrorless interchangeable lens camera to actually have 4K video. You know, much like the Nikon D90 being the first DSLR to have video, and a few months later the Canon 5D Mark II being the first DSLR to have 1080p video, GH4 was the very first mirrorless camera to actually have 4K video. Okay, that only took 20 minutes. All right, we've switched cameras now, so everything up to this point was filmed on the Olympus EM1 Mark II. Now everything is coming from the Panasonic GH4 itself. Same lens though, still using the Panasonic Leica 25mm f1.4, so focal length is relatively the same. However, this brings us to the first point I want to talk about, which is autofocus. You know, normally when I film with the Olympus or the Canon M50 or the Sony ZV-E10, I don't think about autofocus at all. I just kind of hit record, step in front of the camera and start talking. With the GH4, as you can kind of see in some of these outtakes here, it ain't that simple. You know, we're dealing with a contrast detect autofocus system, and it does require a bit more finessing and massaging to get it to actually work the way you want it to work. See, for anyone who might not be familiar, when the rest of the industry started switching to phase detect autofocus, Panasonic, for whatever reason, actually stuck with contrast detect autofocus, and it kind of shows. For one, things like this on the Olympus or the Canon or the Sony, I just hit record and start talking. With the Panasonic, as you can see in that shot, it takes kind of a while to actually find focus. See, one of the most obvious problems with contrast detect autofocus is it's just slow. You know, when I film these videos, there's always that part where I hold the camera up and I'm talking about the build quality, and then I pull it down and it reveals my face and I'm standing there talking. You literally can't film a clip like that on the GH4 just because the autofocus can't keep up. Now, fortunately, I realize a lot of you guys clicking on this video are probably filmmakers, and you're probably behind the camera manually focusing, so autofocus isn't that big of a problem. But I am saying this for anyone who's looking at this camera for YouTube videos, that is one of those things that you need to take into consideration. For the love of God. And speaking of video, that's one of the areas where the GH4 made huge improvements over the GH3, which was a huge improvement in and of itself. I mean, the GH3 was when Panasonic really started to show that they actually cared and were very serious about the GH line. The GH4 doesn't disappoint. You know, with the GH4, you have all the picture profiles that you would expect, and you have the addition of Cinelike D, Cinelike V, which we're filming in currently, and Vlog. Not to mention, you've got a ton of other options with codecs and bit rates that the GH3 didn't have. And of course, the biggest change of all is where the GH3 topped out at 1080p 60 frames per second, the GH4 does 4K at 24 and 30 frames per second. And it didn't just stop there. The GH4 added so many new video features over the GH3. You've got focus peaking with 2 zebra settings to highlight overexposed areas. You've got control over master pedestal and a luminance scale. You've got color bars for calibration. And on top of all of that, you have the ability to express shutter speed and ISO in terms of shutter angle and gain. And another nice little bonus with the GH4 is, much like the GH3, it actually has really good preamps. Audio coming from the GH3 and the GH4 actually sounds really, really good. Now, on the other hand, looking forward a model to the GH5, there is one thing that's kind of a bummer with the GH4, and that's the fact that it has no in-body image stabilization, whereas the GH5 actually has pretty amazing stabilization. So that begs the obvious question, is the GH4 still worth it in 2022? And for me, I'd say it's a definite yes. I mean, it does have its shortcomings. There's bad autofocus and there's no in-body image stabilization. But having said that, if you're a filmmaker on a budget and you're literally looking for something under $500, I don't think you're going to find another camera with this many video-centric features in that $450 price range. You know, you can find other cameras in that price range that have good-looking video, namely like Sony a6000 or a6300, but you're not going to find a camera in that $450 range that has that many video-centric features. That, on the other hand, is really hard to come by in that price range, and for that reason, waiting on this car to quit f***ing up my audio, thank you. And for that reason, I'd say the GH4 is definitely something worth considering. Anyway, I think that's all I got for today, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.